Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to invite you back to Plenary 4 of IST-Africa 2021 on the 10th of May. So this morning, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mmboneni, who is the Deputy Director General, Technology Innovation at the Department of Science and Innovation. Today, he's going to present insights into the lessons learned from leveraging technological innovation to manage a pandemic. So previously, Mmboneni was DGG for International Cooperation and Resources and has held several positions at the Department of Science and Innovation, including being Chief Director, International Resources, Director, Strategic Partnerships, and Director, Global Projects. And during this period, he has overseen South Africa's growing participation in EU research funding programs, led the mobilization of the official development assistance funds to support South Africa's science system, and the department's partnership with multinational companies. Mmboneni has extensive experience in the management of science, technology, and innovation programs, which includes years of coordination, implementation, and management of technology and human resources for industry program, the South African Public-Private Partnership Program in Research and Development, aimed at improving competitiveness of industry. And while at DSI, in the past, he oversaw the implementation of the South Africa-Finland Innovation Partnership Programs. So now I'd like to introduce Mmboneni.
Good morning. Firstly, let me send my sincere greetings to all the participants of IST-Africa 2021. It is really an honor for me to be participating in this event this year. And I would like to thank both Paul and Miriam, not only for organizing this and for inviting me, but for the fact that you have really shown your commitment to the matters of IST and connectivity in the African continent now for decades. I am pleased as I'm going to be talking to you today about the importance or the lessons that we have learned for leveraging technologies in the times of pandemic. And this is really coming at a time when we are actually talking the lived experiences of what we have to go through during this very difficult time. And before I go into the details of how we actually need to appreciate technology in dealing with pandemics, I want to highlight a couple of points. And these points are very important because they are the points that actually direct us as to how we are going to or we must deal with matters of technologies in responding to pandemics. One is that you never plan for pandemic during pandemic. So when the pandemic reaches or hits you, you needed to have already prepared for it before it actually happens. And this is really going to be explained as I go further. Now, the second point is that you need to invest in science. And again, this is part of the lived experience that we have had in South Africa, that without investment in science, technology, and innovation, it becomes extremely difficult to be able to respond in a timely manner, but also to make sure that your responses are actually able to achieve the kind of results that we want to achieve. So that is quite another point that I want us to have in mind. Invest in science, technology, and in innovation. The third point is that you must never do anything alone. You know, if I take the analogy of a human being, as a person on your own, you've got only 2 eyes, you've got 2 ears, you've got 1 mouth. Whereas when you look at how you need to respond to a pandemic, what you require is a 360-degree approach, which then means that you need to have the complementarity of many other eyes in your response. So that is really, again, one aspect I will expand further when I go into aspects of how technologically you need to deal with this. The other point that I want to really look at is that it is important to embrace technology. And again, the reason why it is important to embrace technology is because in the absence of appreciation of technologies, that is where we begin to see a lot of fake news, some of which are so technically and scientifically nonsensical. But you still find that because society sometimes is not able to embrace science, technology, and innovation, you are able to have those fake news entertained, sometimes to very detrimental outcomes. And we have seen in countries, both developed and some developing, where, for example, you have seen people going on and touching telecommunication towers simply because people believed that COVID-19 had some sort of relationship with 5G networks. So that is really one aspect that I think we needed to appreciate in terms of responding to pandemic and learning lessons from technology. So how do those lessons translate, for example, to what we have done in South Africa? And I really quite want us to really understand that there is a lot of investment that primarily us as the Department of Science and Technology representing the government of South Africa, we have been investing in science for many decades. And some of the areas of science that we're investing on, people were asking us a lot of questions, but hang on, why are you investing in a study like this? What value does it add in our livelihoods? But however, our understanding of what the future of a knowledge economy looks like has actually encouraged us to continue those investments. And I will highlight to you as to what some of them have been able to do during this period of pandemic. Now, let us look at the work that we have been doing over the years. And these are the lessons that we have learned through previous pandemics. And the one thing that science, technology, and innovation needs to teach us is that one lesson that you have learned in dealing with another pandemic must never be discarded, but must be built on because you will need it in future. We all know, for example, that South Africa had a very difficult time dealing with the issue of HIV and AIDS. And so we're also dealing with other challenges such as tuberculosis, and you throw in other social problems such as inequality, poverty, unemployment, and also crime. And there has been over time a lot of investment in technologies that deal with these particular aspects, and they have been able to come in very handy in our response to COVID-19. Now let me pick on the issue of the health sciences, our investment and response to HIV and AIDS. We have been able over the years to build a lot of capabilities, both human and infrastructure, in terms of responding to HIV and AIDS. Our laboratories and sciences and work that has been done, for example, at the Caprisa Center at UKZN, the work towards the development of HIV and AIDS vaccines, that work has been very crucial as an anchor of our response to COVID-19. Now, that has actually created a whole lot of potential for our response, especially in dealing with issues of epidemiology, in dealing with issues of doing tracking and tracing, which we have been quite excellent in doing. The other aspect is actually the work around genomic surveillance. And I need not tell you, if you haven't heard, that South Africa has been one of the leading countries in the work around the genomic sequencing, surveillance, and even going to an extent of identifying as first country some of the common strains that are currently creating a lot of problems globally around COVID-19. And this work would not have been possible have we not invested in science, technology, and innovation during the previous pandemics and currently, but also appreciating that when you invest in science, nothing is actually a waste. Now, the other aspect that I want to really draw to you is that when you respond to a pandemic, it's very much typical like when you are actually taking a flight. For you to have a safe flight and a safe landing, firstly, you need to know where you are. After knowing where you are, you need to be very clear about where you want to go. However, for you to be able to take those decisions, you are going to need to be guided by a whole lot of parameters. And here in the sciences, for example, what we realized in response to COVID is that, firstly, we needed to realize where the hot spots are in terms of COVID-19. When you have determined where those hotspots are, and then you say, how do we actually manage to make sure that, firstly, those fires are contained, and secondly, after containing them, that we can find ways of extinguishing them. And in order to do that, there has been a lot of work that needed to be done around tracking, tracing, and also finding and arresting the spreaders. And arresting here, I don't mean taking people to prison, but I mean arresting the whole phenomenon of making sure that where you need to cap mobility of people in as far as it is reasonable, then you do that. Because the critical thing about a pandemic like one we're dealing with now is that it moves only when people move. And therefore you need to be able to measure it by how people are moving and where they are moving to. And that brings me to the other aspect of the role of technology. Because the one critical area of technology in terms of dealing with movement is the fact that we are blessed as a country in the sense that every single South African mostly has got a tracker in them. And this tracker is called a mobile phone. Because this tracker, wherever you go and wherever you're moving to, it will actually be signing in to indicate where you're going and where you're coming from. And as a result, if those people that are involved in those mobilities are actually infected or they are carriers, you are then able to see if they are moving from a hotspot to another area that is not as impacted on. You can then begin to put mechanisms on the ground to manage that particular outbreak. And this is one thing that we've been able to do in South Africa, working with various mobile telephone companies. And this is really what brings me to the point of not doing it alone, because we had to work very closely with the private sector. We had to bring on board religious leaders. We had to bring on board all political leaders. We had to bring on board people that are seen to be leaders in communities, in societies, so that the message can actually be carried with its entirety towards everybody. And in order to enable that, technology was quite critical. Now, one of the areas that I want to highlight relates to the modern technology, which we normally would refer to as machine-to-machine learning. And here, I want to talk about machine-to-machine communications. I've already indicated that in South Africa, the majority of people have mobile cell phones. And those cell phones have Bluetooth enablement. And one of the things that we've been able to do is to launch as sovereign government a platform called COVID Alert SA. This app would allow or enable communication between two mobile or more mobile phones, and this was really mainly to ensure that where people are going to come together, whether it is in a taxi or in various modes of transport or in a meeting or it's just another accidental meet and greet, that as long as your Bluetooth is on, when you are having your own chat, your telephones will actually be having their own communications. And out of that conversation, if for some reason a couple of days later, I, who have been communicating with you, test positive for COVID, then the app that I have, which is COVID Alert SA, will then alert whoever I have been in the same space with that they have been in touch or in contact or in close contact with somebody who has tested positive, which means that they now need to be able to either self-quarantine or go for testing and others. So this is really one very exciting thing about the lessons that we have learned about embracing technology in South Africa when it comes to COVID responses. So I therefore want to say technology has indeed been very crucial in our response, one of them including the fact that the economy, somewhat even though restricted, has been able to continue through technology because we've been able to use various video conferencing mechanisms. We've been able to make sure that people continue to do their work. We've been able to make sure that people can continue to do their shopping. We've been able to also make sure that children can play. I mean, I have children who've got relatives throughout the countries. And during COVID-19, they were able to go online and chat and even play games with their cousins who are as far away as Port Elizabeth, Limpopo, etc. And this is really just to make sure or to highlight the fact that our response to COVID-19 using technology and innovation has actually indicated to us that a new life, that which have been spoken about around the fourth industrial revolution, is actually here and possible. Now, as I close, I want us to begin to realize that As we talk about the role that technology can play in our lives, it's really about how all these technologies actually converge together. You can be talking about ICTs, which are really the core and central to how the response to COVID-19 has been. The biological sciences, here we talk about biotechnologies in its role in um, understanding how a human body works, and also making sure that whatever comes out of you, whether it is your temperature, can actually give us a message about your state of health, and therefore possibly whether you might be at risk of infection or not. So I really am quite excited that with this lesson that we have learned, that it must put the world into a much broader appreciation of the role that science, technology, and innovation can play. And especially as we engage in IST Africa this year, I want us to really make sure that we continue to encourage the building of infrastructures and facilities that will enable telecommunications, and also enabling this to really get into our aspects, whether it is health, whether it is play, whether it is work, as well as making sure that we are interconnected in a manner that even helps us to deal with issues around securities and crime. Thank you very much.